thank you for taking your time to accept the interview from the United Daily News.
No, hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited that the book is out in Taiwan, and you helping me get the word out is greatly appreciated.
Okay, and first of all, I want to ask you about the book. Is that someone had described your book, The Battlegrounds, as part memoir, part history, and part think tank report. How would you describe your book, and what do you expect your readers will learn after reading it?
Long, I made kind of this is a mission statement for myself when I retired. When I retired from the Army after 34 years, probably kind of predictably, right? I said that I was going to spend my second career trying to generate a more full understanding of the greatest challenges and opportunities that we faced internationally, so that we could have a basis for working together to build a better future for generations to come. So the book is an effort to describe those challenges, to describe those opportunities in a way that more and more people across the free world understand them and can demand more effective policies. And as you know, in the book, there are several themes. One is the need to improve our strategic competence, and to do so by generating strategic empathy, the ability to view complex challenges and opportunities from the perspective of others. And then another theme in the book is to understand the history of how these challenges and opportunities developed, because as a historian, again, predictably, I don't believe you can make a projection into the future without understanding how the past produced the present.
But some people are kind of disappointed that you didn't talk that much as they expected of your life in White House as National Security Advisor. Did that on purpose?
Yes. So in the beginning of Battlegrounds, I just say straight up front, this is not the book that many people wanted me to write, which was, another tell-all about, about President Donald Trump.
Right.
And so, of course, I thought that I could maybe write a book that was more important than that. And of course, I do have stories about some of my interactions with President Trump and the trips I took with him and the policies and decisions.
Right.
And as you know, I'm quite critical of some of the Trump administration's policies, especially toward the end of his administration. But I thought that, what I wanted to do was transcend the Trump administration and write a book that was going to last for a long time, and hopefully impart real understanding about the challenges we're facing and what we can do, again, to build a better future.
I want to ask you the question everyone is desperate to know right now. Is there going to be a war in Ukraine? If there is, do you expect that NATO and the US will be drawn into the conflict?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Chen-Long, there already is a war in Ukraine.
Right.
And since 2014, and we have to recognize that 7,000 Ukrainians have died in that war already, and I believe that there is going to be renewed aggression, and I believe that just based on what we're seeing in terms of the preparations for it. And I think why it's important to believe that it's going to happen is that only if we have a sense of urgency, I think, can all of us take the actions necessary to deter that conflict. Of course, that involves what the Biden administration is calling, relentless diplomacy. But one of the quotations I use in Battlegrounds is the quotation by the former Secretary of State George Shultz, who was my colleague here at the Hoover Institution until he passed away this past year at the age of 100. Right, and when he was shortly after he was Secretary of State, he said in his memoir that negotiation is a euphemism for capitulation unless the shadow of power is cast across the negotiating table. And so I think it's important for us to pay attention to the military and economic dimensions of deterrence vis-a-vis Ukraine. And we've seen some of that with promised very severe sanctions, maybe even cutting Russia off from access to the dollar economy, or export controls that could cripple the Russian economy even further, restriction of gas exports, even to gas-starved Germany, right? But so I think the economic dimension of this was important, but I think we're a little bit late to the game on reinforcing Ukraine with defensive capabilities, and then also reinforcing other NATO countries. Now that's happening now, and hopefully this is changing the discourse in the Kremlin with Vladimir Putin.
You were in charge of a research on the 2014 Russian invasion of Ukraine. What is the lesson you draw from that research, and how can that help President Biden to better respond to the current crisis?
Yeah, Shenlong, I tell the story in Battlegrounds. I was on my way to brief the results of that study when my phone rang and said, "Hey, can you go to Mar-a-Lago, Florida, and interview with Donald Trump?" Right. So that was my last thing I was working on before I went to the White House. And what we learned from looking not only at the annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Ukraine, but going back to the 2007 denial of service cyber attacks against Estonia, the 2008 invasion of Georgia, the sustained campaign of political subversion, is that we have to get much more effective across the free world at countering aggression that aims to achieve objectives below the threshold of what might elicit a military response. So this is an important lesson for a series of lessons for Taiwan as well, because you've been living in that environment since at least 1950. So in terms of economic aggression and political subversion, sustained disinformation, efforts to co-opt elites and then to use military coercion as well. So I think that we have to learn from Taiwan's experience, and especially I think the way that Taiwan rallied, especially after Chinese Communist Party aggression against Hong Kong, and what we've seen in Hong Kong, and the way that Taiwan has taken this holistic approach to strengthening its defense. I think this is what has to happen against Russia, which I describe in the book as employing Russian new generation warfare, which are campaigns of, I use the 3 Ds or the 4 Ds, disruption, disrupt with cyber attacks, disrupt with the threat of a conventional invasion, and then disinformation, sustained disinformation. What do you mean we're going to attack? We're not going to attack. I mean, it's just complete, just lies, right? What do you mean we shot down a Malaysian airliner? We didn't do that. I mean, this is they'll deny even the most obvious acts of aggression, and then it's important to recognize that they're trying to create dependencies as well. Dependence on Russian gas in particular, and Germany's dependence on gas, and how that is muting the European Union's response and Germany's response. This is quite analogous, I think, and of course you can overdo these analogies, but to the degree to which the Chinese Communist Party has tried to create economic dependencies for Taiwan. And you saw that play out against Australia most recently, for example, or poor Lithuania, right? Recently. And so I think it's important for all of our governments to recognize that we have to do everything we can to insulate our people, insulate our businesses, and insulate our society overall from the coercive power of the Chinese Communist Party, or in this case, we're discussing the Kremlin as well.
China's Xi Jinping is watching Putin's and President Biden's action and reaction very closely, and decided whether he should invade Taiwan or not. There's a lot of talks about this. What's in Xi Jinping's mind right now about thinking about the U.S. response and how he should proceed in the future?
Shenlong, what I write about in Battlegrounds is I try to write from the perspective of the Chinese Communist Party leadership as best I can, from talking to experts and my own observations, and I really believe that Xi Jinping is driven by this combination of fear and aspiration. Fear of losing the party's exclusive grip on power internally, and the aspiration to realize the China dream. You've seen how he's tried to rewrite Chinese history in recent years and months even, and the way that he has portrayed this arc of history from Mao securing the revolution and Deng Xiaoping bringing prosperity, and now it's going to be Xi Jinping who really restores the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China to global greatness, right? And under this narrative of national rejuvenation and the China dream and so forth. And of course, Taiwan is the object of so much of this fear and aspiration. I think on the fear side, because of the miracle of Taiwan. I mean, the tremendous success of Taiwan as a successful democracy, as a thriving, free market, entrepreneurial, economic model. And what this is a direct affront, I think, in his view, to the Chinese Communist Party, because what he would like the world to believe is that the Chinese people are culturally predisposed toward not wanting a say in how they're governed. And of course, Taiwan exposes that lie. And then of course the aspiration, right, in his view, to make China whole again and so forth. And I know that you're tracking this very closely, but I write about this in Battlegrounds, for audiences around the world. I think we're entering a period of increasing danger associated with that narrative, associated with the 20th Communist Party Congress, which is coming up, and which will probably have Xi Jinping becoming, the next Mao, the next chairman for life, and I believe that Xi Jinping thinks that he has a fleeting window of opportunity to make good on his promises, and this is why, of course, I think that President Tsai Ing-wen has done a great job in strengthening Taiwanese defense capabilities. I think that's immensely important these days. And it is for all of us to work together to ensure that the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, is deterred from taking aggression.
I want to move on to other topic, especially one of the things that people are mentioning, the debacle of President Biden had been his move to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. What went wrong here? I mean, what my concern especially is, has it caused a tension now between the military and the civilian leaders nowadays in the States?
Well, Chen-Long, we have a very strong tradition, obviously, of civilian control over the military, and that tradition goes back to the founders of our country being very concerned to not repeat the bloody wars in England in the 17th century. And so they were very fearful of the military, and the military has this professional ethic of being completely separate, from any kind of partisan politics and that sort of thing. So I'm not worried about that. But what I'm worried about is a lack of confidence these days. What I see in Afghanistan, I saw that as self-defeat that led to kind of a surrender to a jihadist terrorist organization. I don't really understand. I can't understand it in any other way. And I think what happened is we allowed this narrative to take over of we need to end the endless war. I'll tell you, by 2018, 2019, we had relatively few troops there. 10,000 troops, which is for the United States very low in connection with deployments abroad. And we were enabling the Afghans to bear the brunt of the fight. And the story that I tell in Battlegrounds is the story of how the Afghan people were fighting on a modern day frontier between barbarism and civilization. I think for the good of all of us, right? And sadly, we let this narrative drive the prioritization of withdrawal at all costs. If you look at the very last paragraph of the second chapter in Afghanistan, what I write there is that the costs of withdrawal will far exceed the costs of what would have been a sustained and sustainable commitment there. And I believe we're seeing that now. And it's a tragedy. It's a humanitarian catastrophe, right. And a security catastrophe as well.
There's another thing I want to ask you about, also relating with military and civilian leaders' tension, is that Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, called his counterpart, General Li Zuocheng, twice on October 30th last year and January the 8th this year, to assure him that there's there's no plan for the Trump administration to launch an attack on China. General Milley was attacked by a Republican for accusing him for treason, while General Milley defended those calls are made with sanctions and brief across the administration. As a former national security advisor and a senior general yourself, how do you see this? Is the cause necessary given the circumstances? Was General Milley overstep his boundary?
Qianlong, I know this would never happen in Taiwan, where the press would exaggerate something that happened.
Right.
but I think that's what happened in Washington, right? So you know, when somebody when General Milley makes a phone call like that, there are probably 15 other people in the room. I would imagine.
Right. And
you know, a memo of that phone call goes to the Secretary of Defense and it goes to the White House.
Right.
And so I think that the right word to describe this would be routine. I think it was a routine communications. And I think there were probably some indicators, you know, that, you know, I don't know, how well do you think the PLA leadership understands the United States? Probably not very well, right? So he was probably thinking about how are they seeing this kind of this contentious election here, right? And so I think it was just normal routine communications.
How do you think about President Biden's China policy right now? The keywords seem to be strategic competition with a guardrail. How would you rate his performance so far? Is it B+ or C-, and why?
Yeah, it's closer to a B+, I think, and I think, Qianlong, there's a great deal of continuity, as you can see, between the Trump and Biden administration. Maybe this might be the only area of continuity, and the disaster of Afghanistan, that was continuity too between the Trump and Biden administration. But on this side, in a bad way. But I think this is very positive, and I think we ought to send some flowers to Chairman Xi Jinping and a box of chocolates to say thank you for helping us find common ground in the United States between the political parties, because it's really been Chinese Communist Party aggression that has made it unambiguously clear that the only way forward is what we called it in the Trump administration was transparent competition. And under this idea, you know, that the competition does not have to lead to confrontation. I think quite the contrary. I think the previous approach of cooperation, engagement with the Chinese Communist Party, under the assumption that China, the PRC, having been welcomed into the international order, would play by the rules, would liberalize its economy, and ultimately would liberalize its form of governance. Hey, that didn't happen. That was a bad assumption. And so the only, I think, the alternative really is transparent competition. And I think there are some very positive developments on the economic front. I think countering various forms of Chinese economic aggression, you know, delisting Chinese companies from U.S. exchanges that don't meet the reporting requirements, restricting U.S. investment, and I think Taiwan should do the same thing into Chinese companies that have to do with their defense or their war making capabilities, as well as anything having to do with extending the police state, the surveillance police state, or how about, you know, implementing genocide or extinguishing human freedom in Hong Kong. I mean, the idea that any citizens from the free world would invest in companies like Hikvision and SenseTime, that's kind of crazy, I think, right? And so I think you know, I think that the transparency associated with restricting those kind of investments, and hopefully financial flows will begin to stop going into China, because I think it's so clear now. I mean, even if you're a clothing manufacturing company, you can't, you're forced to compromise your principles to do business now in China. And we've seen this with, you know, the NBA, right? With Marriott, with so many companies that have been burned, and most recently the crackdown on the tech sector. You saw that LinkedIn, you know, left, Yahoo left China. And so, you know, a lot of people talk about, well, do you think it's wise to decouple? Well, we have to realize it's Xi Jinping who wants to decouple with this dual circulation economy and to get an exclusive grip on very sensitive and important supply chains for the future. So this is why it's so important. And I've really been heartened by the way that Taiwan and the U.S. are working together. I think this, the TSMC, for example, I think is questioning its investments in China, which it should. And instead, investing in other areas to build more resilience. The fab plant in Arizona, for example, and I see growing opportunities for economic ties to strengthen between Taiwan and the United States. I hope that there's a free trade deal, for example, between Taiwan and the United States. So I think, again, I think we ought to thank Xi Jinping for all this because he's really made it unambiguously clear that this is the most important competition of the 21st century is this competition between our free and open societies and China's closed mercantilist authoritarian model.
Finally, you describe yourself as apolitical in the tradition of General George Marshall. I personally is a great admirer of General Marshall, but we in Chinese as a whole knew General Marshall quite well. He is mediating Chinese civil war, is probably the only single failure in his whole career. I mean, how do you see yourself, your role in politics as well as in the military right now?
What I hope to do is to appeal to those who don't define themselves by partisan politics, right? I think that I think on the issues that I cover in the book, which in Battlegrounds, it goes from 2 chapters on China, on Russia, 2 chapters on China, 2 on the Middle East broadly, on Iran, on North Korea, and then new arenas of competition involving the interconnected problems of energy security and climate change and health security and food and water security and emerging technologies and so forth and disruptive technologies. And so I think that when we discuss the issues, we have a lot in common, right, across political parties. We have a lot in common across different cultures, right? I don't think there's anybody I know who doesn't want a better future for their children and their grandchildren. So the idea of Battlegrounds was to foster this better understanding of these challenges so we can come together and work together across the free world. And so I know that's an ambitious mission and idea, but I hope that I get a lot of Taiwanese readers, and I hope your readers will let me know if I've succeeded or not.
Thank you very much, General, for your time, and hope you can come to Taiwan for a visit and we can meet face to face then.
Qianlong, thank you so much. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
上网搜寻 VIP.udn.com 到联合报数位版看更多精彩的报道。